All right, get ready for today's deep dive. We've got some pretty wild news to unpack. We're talking potential impeachment in South Korea, a Disney controversy that everyone's buzzing about, and we're going to take a look at the life and passing of Eminem's mom.
Yeah, and you've brought three articles from Breitbart News to kind of guide our conversation here.
Exactly. We're going to break down these events, see what's really going on, and maybe even find some surprising connections.
Sounds good. Where do we start?
Let's jump into South Korea. This whole situation feels like a political thriller. President Yoon Suk-yeol suddenly declares martial law, and now everyone's calling for his impeachment. What in the world happened?
Well, President Yoon's approval ratings have been kind of low for a while now, and there's been a lot of tension since the opposition party won the last election. They've controlled the National Assembly since April, which has created some friction with Yoon and his conservative People Power Party.
So he's facing opposition from both sides.
It seems that way, yeah. His declaration of martial law, he cited threats from North Korea and the need to, and I quote, eradicate unscrupulous pro-Pyongyang anti-state forces in the National Assembly. It really caught everyone off guard.
It does sound pretty extreme. Any chance his concerns were, legitimate?
It's possible, but the timing and the language he used, it definitely raised some eyebrows. The opposition immediately called it a power grab, a violation of the Constitution, even treason. They filed for impeachment right away.
Wow. And what about his own party? Do they back him up on this?
Surprisingly, no. Even members of Yoon's own party were shocked. They called the declaration wrong and demanded an explanation. Some are even saying his defense minister, who supposedly recommended martial law, should be fired.
So he's alienated his allies and his opponents.
Basically. And to make matters worse, this all happened in the middle of the night. The military had surrounded the National Assembly building, but lawmakers still managed to, gather, and they voted unanimously against martial law.
A dramatic standoff. Is there any footage of this? I'd love to get a sense of what it was like to be there.
Actually, there is. There's a video going around online. Opposition leader Lee Jae-myung actually climbed the walls of the National Assembly building to get inside and oppose the martial law decree. He even live-streamed the whole thing.
That's wild. So where do things stand now? Is impeachment actually likely?
It's a real possibility. The motion is in motion, and it needs a two-thirds majority vote to pass, but some of Yoon's senior aides have already resigned. His chief of staff, national security advisor, if enough members of his own party turn against him, it could definitely happen.
Sounds like South Korea's political landscape is on shaky ground. What are the long-term consequences of all of this?
Well, this could lead to a period of instability, not just within South Korea, but in the whole region. A weaker South Korea could embolden North Korea, and it could strain relations with allies like the U.S. And of course, there's always the concern about democratic backsliding when a leader tries to seize power like this.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. It really makes you think about how quickly things can change, even in a democracy. It makes you wonder about the global ripple effects of these kinds of events.
It does. It's a reminder that everything's connected, and what happens in one part of the world can definitely affect everyone else.
Well said.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about something that's causing a lot of debate online, Disney's live-action remake of Snow White. And this time, it's not just about the dwarfs, although that is part of it.
This is one of those situations where it seems like Disney just can't win. The internet is on fire with reactions to the trailer, and they're not all good.
From what I've seen, there are a few main issues. First, there's Rachel Zegler, who's playing Snow White. Some of her past comments, especially about then-candidate Trump back in 2020, have caused some controversy. Then there's the whole thing with the dwarfs being removed from the film because of Peter Dinklage's criticism.
Right. Dinklage, who's an amazing actor with dwarfism, argued that portraying the dwarfs the way the original Snow White did was stereotypical and potentially harmful. Disney said they would be replacing the dwarfs with magical beings, so they wouldn't be reinforcing those stereotypes.
It seems like a good decision, but I've heard that's also caused backlash.
Yeah, some people feel like it's erasing a key part of the story, while others think it's just Disney being overly sensitive and catering to critics.
So a bit of a lose-lose situation for them.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there's the controversy with Zegler being vocal in her support for Palestine. She's shared free Palestine messages online, which has led to some tension, especially because her co-star, Gal Gadot, is Israeli, and she served in the Israeli Defense Forces and was even Miss Israel.
So a lead actress with some controversial comments, iconic characters being removed, and a clash of political ideologies, all in a classic fairy tale. No wonder people are upset.
This whole thing really reflects the bigger cultural debates about representation, adaptation, and political activism in Hollywood. How much should studios change classic stories? Can they please everyone? And how much do an actor's personal beliefs affect how people see their work? These are big questions that go way beyond this one movie.
I agree. It really highlights the challenges of dealing with complex issues in today's world.
For sure. It'll be interesting to see how Disney handles this, especially since they've reportedly spent $300 million on the film.
Wow. High stakes. Before we move on, I got to ask, what do you think about this? I know we try to be impartial, but you must have some thoughts on this whole Snow White thing.
Well, if we just focus on the movie itself, put aside the political stuff, I can't help but think about how much the original Snow White meant to me as a kid. It makes me wonder if these new versions, while they're trying to be inclusive, might lose some of that magic that made people love the story for so long.
That's an interesting point. It's like trying to find a balance between keeping the essence of the story and changing with the times.
Exactly. There's no easy answer.
Well, let's move on to a story that's a little more somber now. Debbie Nielsen, Eminem's mother, recently passed away. She was 69. And their relationship was, well, complicated, to say the least. And a lot of that tension ended up in Eminem's music.
Definitely turbulent, yeah. Eminem often portrayed his mother negatively in his lyrics, accused her of drug abuse, neglect. Songs like Cleaning Out My Closet are just raw emotion, and they paint a very specific picture of their relationship.
Yeah, I remember that line. Witnessing your mama popping prescription pills in the kitchen. That stuck with me.
You know what? Let's actually listen to a quick clip from Cleaning Out My Closet to hear that raw emotion.
Wow, you can feel the pain and anger in his voice. Their relationship was clearly really complicated.
It was. But it's important to remember that Debbie Nelson did try to share her side of the story. She wrote a book called My Son Marshall, My Son Eminem, where she tried to explain things from her perspective.
And she gave a lot of interviews over the years saying that Eminem exaggerated their problems and didn't talk about the good times.
That's right. She always said they used to be really close and that he chose to focus on the negative parts in his music.
It's one of those he said, she said situations where we'll never know the whole truth. It reminds us that there are always multiple sides to every story.
Absolutely. Every relationship has its complexities, and it's rare that one person is totally right or wrong.
Very true. But there's one more thing about this story that makes it even more interesting.
You're talking about Eminem becoming a grandfather.
Yeah. His daughter, Haley Jade, is pregnant. It makes you wonder how this new chapter, becoming a grandfather, will affect him, considering his own complicated family history.
Yeah, it really is a time for reflection.
Absolutely.
This news and his mother's passing, it's got to bring up some unresolved stuff.
It makes you think about, how family dynamics work, how good and bad stuff from our past can shape us, even in the future, and how those patterns repeat across generations.
That's deep. It seems like with each story we talk about, we find these connections, between personal things and the bigger picture.
It's true. And speaking of connections, you mentioned earlier that things could get unstable in South Korea. That article talked about their economy too, right?
Right. South Korea is a big player, especially in tech and manufacturing. Any instability there could affect the whole world.
So this isn't just some local issue. It could actually impact us all.
Yeah, exactly. We're all connected, remember?
Okay, so we've got political turmoil in South Korea, a fairy tale remake causing a stir, and a rapper dealing with family and legacy. It's a lot to take in.
It is. Shows the variety of stuff happening in the world right now. Political, cultural, personal, everything.
Before we finish up, there's one more article I want to touch on. It's about the shooting of Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare in New York City. Really makes you think violence can happen anywhere, even when you think you're safe.
It's especially surprising because it happened in New York. They have some of the toughest gun laws in the country.
I know. Every Town for Gun Safety, that group Mike Bloomberg started, they rank New York as number 2 for gun control. So this case makes you wonder, how effective are these laws, really?
Yeah, it's a tough issue. A lot of strong opinions on both sides.
I mean, if a CEO can get shot in broad daylight in one of the most regulated cities, does it even matter how many laws there are?
A lot of people are asking that same question.
What are your thoughts?
Well, we got to look at everything involved,
Like what?
For one, New York City, yeah, it has strict gun laws, but it's still a huge city with a lot of social and economic problems. Poverty, inequality, all that stuff can lead to crime, no matter what the gun laws are. Plus, you've got illegal guns coming in from states with looser rules.
So just making gun laws stricter isn't the whole answer.
Nope. It's way more complicated than that. We need a plan that tackles the problem from different angles. We got to address things like poverty and mental health, but also make sure guns don't end up in the wrong hands.
That makes sense. A more complete approach is what we need.
Yeah, I think so. This case also shows that gun violence isn't just a problem for certain areas or groups of people. It can happen to anyone, anywhere, no matter who they are or how much money they have.
That's a scary thought.
It is. But it's also a wake-up call. We can't just sit back and do nothing. We got to keep fighting for solutions, keep talking about this stuff, and keep working to make things safer for everyone.
Okay, time for another gear shift. From political drama in South Korea to the Snow White remake to a rapper coming to terms with his mom's death and becoming a grandpa, and now gun violence in America. What a ride.
It has been, and I think it all goes back to how everything's connected, you know?
Right, you've got a president on the verge of impeachment for a power grab, a fairy tale remake that's stirring up controversy, a rapper dealing with family stuff, and a CEO getting killed in a city with tough gun laws. What's the common thread here?
Yeah, it's like all these things, the political stuff in Korea, the Hollywood drama, a celebrity's personal loss, and then this random act of violence are somehow all linked. Kind of like the butterfly effect, right? One little thing happens, and it sets off a chain reaction that leads to something huge.
I think that's a great point. It reminds us that our world is this complex web of interconnected systems, and, what seems like an isolated incident can actually have far-reaching consequences. We can't understand any single event without looking at the bigger picture.
It is like we've been saying this whole time, everything is connected. And it makes you think, how much do our relationships and past experiences actually shape what happens in the world? And then how do our own biases affect how we see things? Those are great questions to think about. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and forget that behind every decision, every creative thing, every act of violence, there are people, and they all have their own stories and reasons for doing things.
It's like that quote, everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind. Always.
Exactly. Understanding all those complexities can help us have more empathy and see the world in a more nuanced way. It lets us look beyond the surface and figure out what's really going on.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes. It's made me think harder about the information I see and try to understand different perspectives on every story. It's so easy to jump to conclusions based on what we already think, but taking a step back and really looking at the details, it's a good thing to do.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking of thinking deeper, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. We've been talking about how personal stuff can shape world events, but what about how world events can shape us?
Oh, interesting. Like a feedback loop.
Exactly. Think about the things we talked about today. How is that political mess in South Korea affecting people living there? How might the Snow White controversy change things for actors or filmmakers? And what about Eminem becoming a grandpa right after his mom died? How might that connect with people who've had similar family issues?
Those are really thought-provoking questions, and they bring us back to what this deep dive is all about, exploring those connections between seemingly random events and finding the human stories behind them.
Exactly. It's about realizing that we're all part of a bigger story, a tapestry made up of all these individual threads.
So as we wrap up this crazy deep dive, I have a challenge for you. What stuck with you? What really hit home? What questions are you still thinking about? Don't just take in the information. Really think about it, analyze it, and let it shape how you see the world. Keep digging deeper, keep questioning, and most importantly, never lose your curiosity.